come to the panel discussion. And I can start with Professor Jeffrey Long. You have 12 minutes.
Okay, 12 minutes. Okay, very good. So rather than reading from prepared remarks, I've quite a few thoughts on this topic. And I also want to respond to some of the things that Professor Sharma was saying, with which I'm deeply in agreement. So a couple of points I would like to make. One thing that Professor Sharma mentioned is the preoccupation with caste, right? And of course, we know that caste itself is not even really an Indic term, right? It comes from Portuguese casta, and whenever it's discussed, it's really sort of amalgamation of varna and jati, which are quite distinct concepts, as I presume we know. But caste seems to be an obsession with many people in the Western world. And one level at which I have encountered this is in the curricula for education of middle school and high school students. So we're not even talking about college, right? We're talking about what do children and teenagers learn about Hinduism. And overwhelmingly, a large portion of the material in the textbooks is about caste. And not just caste, but caste really as it's been represented for the last couple of hundred years in scholarship, which there are all kinds of distortions and issues with that. And I want to share a personal anecdote in this regard, which was a very dismaying one for me. We can't paint all Western scholars with one brush, and I do want to emphasize that. And quite a few of us had our first encounters with Hindu traditions through the writings and through the works of Hindu masters who came to the Western world. So people like Swami Vivekananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and so on, and their disciples. So Westerners like Aldous Huxley, for example. So this was my entry point into the study of Hinduism. So for me, I saw this tradition as something that had profound wisdom to offer and actually solutions to many problems, which, as someone growing up in the Catholic tradition, there were theological issues that I found did not have a resolution within the Christian tradition, but that did have resolution in Vedanta and in Hindu tradition. So this was the kind of interest that drew me. But I think many scholars are drawn through other interests. They're interested in politics, they're interested in how society functions. And so caste becomes a huge preoccupation. And the personal anecdote I want to tell, and my wife was present for this event. I had been doing a good deal of work on Swami Vivekananda and his influence on American popular culture. And I've written on this, including for Prabhupada and the Vedanta Kesari, and soon to come out with a book on Hinduism in America. And the influence of Vedanta has actually been enormous, but largely unknown. The source of many of the ideas that we find in popular cultural phenomena like Star Wars, for example, actually come from Vedanta, but this is not well known. So I gave a talk on this at Elizabethtown College, where I teach, in a packed room. There were probably 100 or more students there. And I went through my slideshow, and I talked about all the various popular cultural figures who have been drawn to Hinduism and have been shaped by Hindu thought. And many of these people are my personal heroes. And so for me, it was a labor of love. I enjoyed sharing this material with the students, and especially talking with them about Swami Vivekananda. And his ideas and his teachings are such a revelation to many Westerners when we come upon them. So I finished my presentation, and it was time for questions. I said, does anyone have any questions? There was one question, only one question, and it was about caste, which I had not mentioned once in my entire presentation, because it wasn't relevant. And the students basically wanted to know, how could Westerners adopt Vedanta, join an organization like the Ramakrishna Mission, and so, because they don't have caste. So how can that be? How can they be part of this Hindu tradition? And so this idea had been really deeply embedded into this young person's mind by the educational system, that Hinduism essentially equals caste. And not that it's an Indian social system in which people of all religions participate. There are non-Hindu castes, and there is casteism practiced by non-Hindus, right? And there are also considerable movements within the Hindu tradition that reject casteism. And it's been a big part of the history of Hinduism to contend against the idea. That's hardly ever represented in the educational system. So this brings me to my second point that I want to make, and some of this relates to an article I did for Bharata a couple of years ago on the phenomenon of Hindu phobia. Right? So irrational aversion to Hinduism, to Hindus, to Hindu practices. And I argued in my article that there are two versions of this, and Dr. Sharma, I think, alluded to this as well when he was saying, well, let's take a sympathetic look at why many Westerners hold some of these attitudes and ideas. There is what we might call culpable Hindu phobia, where you have a very overt political agenda that is directed against Hinduism, whether it comes from a political ideology such as Marxism, or whether it comes from something like a Christian missionary agenda. You have this sort of overt attacks. That's one phenomenon. But I think the far more difficult one to deal with is the unconscious Hinduphobia, which can be an effect of simply absorbing and reproducing the discourse which one has been taught in university by one's professors, by people that one respects, people who know Sanskrit, people who have degrees and hold chairs and that sort of thing. And I think even many scholars who may be very positively disposed towards Hinduism and Hindu traditions nevertheless replicate the Hindu-phobic discourse in their work, because that's how they've been taught things are. And the discourse is very powerful, and it almost seems to have an independent life of its own. In the earlier session, Maharaj was talking about the cloud and how we can download. Another sort of 21st century image I would use here is the meme. Memes get started, and we're not exactly even sure who starts them, but pretty soon we're all passing them around, right? I don't know if any of you have seen the one of the woman yelling at the cat. That's like a popular one right now. So the Hindu-phobic discourse is like a meme. It has a life of its own. And I think this is something that's important to understand, because one of the phenomena, one of the things that's happened in the last 20 to 30 years is, of course, a lot of people in the Hindu community, especially in the US, have become very sensitized to this discourse and have critiqued it, sometimes very well, sometimes maybe not so well, but they have critiqued the discourse. But often these critical writings come across sounding like a conspiracy theory, as though a group of professors got together and decided, okay, how can we malign Hinduism? I think it's far more like a meme. This is something that we reproduce, and I mentioned in my article, I look at some of my own earlier work, and I'll see a sentence or two that I will cringe at now, because as I've deepened in my understanding, I realize, okay, that really was not authentic. That was the one that particularly is relevant in the case of my work is the term neo-Vedanta, which many of you probably know was coined as a pejorative term. It was part of the pejorative imperative. I didn't know that. I saw the term so often, I just thought that meant, well, that's the latest phase of Vedanta, and I used the term profusely in a lot of my earlier work, with no intention of anything pejorative. But see, that's how the discourse gets reproduced. And so a sort of self-critical awareness, I think, has to emerge in the Western Academy. And I think it's beginning to happen, but with its 200 years or so of material that has to be corrected, so it's probably going to take another 200 years to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. You talked about this one question about caste. I was invited by a university in Kerala to talk about our spiritual traditions. And during Q&A, there was only one question. They said, can you tell us how to crack the civil service examination? He said, we are not interested. Tough question. So it's similar, but so I told them one of my favorite verses, Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Mahamanusmar Yudhicha. Remember God and keep preparing for the exam. I now invite Swami for your address, maybe 12 minutes.
So again, I would like to thank Arvind Gupta ji for including this topic, on which we had a session earlier last year. And the problem is quite complicated, particularly now in 2020. So when we talk about Hindu studies, the word studies there makes it only academic. But nothing about Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism can be only related to the present or theory. It has to involve praxis or practice. And the problem here is deep-rooted because I'm 45 now, and when I was growing up as a kid in India, my father had a transferable job, so we were moving from city to city. Every day, wherever I was, we had to reach the home by 6:30 in the evening because there would be prayer. And we had to attend that prayer. On normal days, it will be half an hour. On special days, it will be 1 hour, 1.5 hours. Special days means some festival, like just Janmashtami. For us, fast was not something which was something out of the ordinary. It was normal. Everybody fasted on Shivratri. Everybody fasted on Janmashtami days. And morning we had to do our regular meditation. We were not schooled, we did not go to a particular guru and learn meditation. We just sat, closing our eyes. And those people who belong to my generations, you can recollect, most of you had similar regimen in your house in India. And is that there even? Is it even present today? It is not. Nobody has any prayer session in homes anymore in India. Nobody knows even their family tradition. Very few can actually tell the name of their great grandfather. So you see, what has happened here is, even if a person living in Vasant Kunj today wants to know about Hinduism, that person is not reading Swami Vivekananda, that person is reading a book written by a foreign author. A non-Indian author who was not born in the tradition, who does not know most of the things, who is probably reading Swami Vivekananda to write that book. So our problem is this: when we talk about Hindu studies in India and abroad, the problems and prospects, we should first remember that it is something which is integral to day-to-day life. It was like that, but today unfortunately WhatsApp is integral, probably Cafe Coffee Day is integral, probably Pizza Hut is integral, Swiggy is integral, for all I know, but not Gita. So that has to change, and that cannot change by having some kind of discussion in a think tank like this. It has to change with every individual. It has to be done. At least now, because the world is looking up to India, asking questions about this rich, holy spiritual heritage. So at least you should be aware and updated on that. That is one thing. Second thing is, many people ask me, we particularly in the Ramakrishna Mission, we work in synergy with other religious organizations. So many Christian priests, from say the Society of Jesus, Jesuits, they ask me, Swami, how is it? You being a Hindu, you being in India, you don't get any money to do research on Hinduism. Books don't come cheap, you see. They come costly. And if you have to go to a place to study something, you have this transportation, logistics. In India today, or across the world, if you are doing research on Christianity, you don't need to ask for money. People stand in line to give you money. They bombard you with money, they bombard you with all facilities. It is quite the opposite in the case of Hinduism. I believe that is the case in the West also, in Hinduism. And why is the question? Recently, Sarva Priyananda and the other two people who are now Nagaral Fellowship in Harvard Divinity School. So that was given by Nagaral, a Hindu, right? So why was it not done earlier? Why can't practicing Hindus have recourse to such places? Why can't they go to, say, Harvard Divinity School? Why they can't go to Leuven in Belgium? Why are we not given the money? And please don't tell me that Indians are poor. We have all the so many billionaires across the world are Indians. Why is it that when you see so it's a mindset problem actually. It's not just as Jeffrey rightly said. I cannot say that all Indians, all Western scholars are against Hindu studies or they are misrepresenting Hinduism. No, it's a mindset. See, when you go to a temple, when you have problems, when you are appearing for, you are taking an examination, you go to a temple and you tell the pujari, Pandit ji, mera exam acha ho jana chahiye. But later on when you go, you say don't give dakshina to the pujari. Why? That priest, living in a very paltry amount as salary, is doing so much work as therapy. People are going and having this cathartic experience telling about their family problems. You would rather go to a shrink and give money by the hour, not give some small dakshina to the... So you see, this whole mindset has been targeted. The life way we live has been targeted. And Indians today, even if they have money, they don't understand that it is very much necessary to fund religious studies in India, because it is not just religious studies, it's a complete package, right? It's not like in Christianity. Somebody talks about Christian thing and that person can, after the college, go and do whatever that person wants. In India, it is not like that. It has never been like that. Last year, in a place called Veliyanadu, which is where Shankaracharya was born, because it is his mother's place, so he was born there. And he was brought up in Kaladi, father's house. There is Chinmaya Mission, Chinmaya Vishwavidyapit is there. So there, in October, they had a 3-day conference on oneness, Advaita, in collaboration with Indic Academy. I was invited there, and there you could see the vibrancy of Sanskrit scholarship, debates, arguments, and such lively arguments in Sanskrit, which is called Vakta Sadas. So all these went on, but the point is, where is the exposure? How many of us know of such vibrant tradition? Again, we don't want to know. We would rather forward some white-skinned people doing chanting. That video we would forward it in WhatsApp. We would ask us not learn Sanskrit. And you know what? Most of us, we are already speaking so many words in Sanskrit because we are speaking an Indian language. So Professor Sharma was telling that without learning Sanskrit, it is not, we don't have any hope to solve this problem. He was taking a very radical view, but I would say that already you are speaking Sanskrit. Say Punya, Papa, Tirtha, can go on and on, Rishi, Deva, all these are words in all Indian languages. Even languages like Tamil, who claim that Tamil is a older language older than Sanskrit. Not yet completely verified, but even there, Papa, Punya, Rishi, Deva, etc. is there in Tamil. So, Tirtha. So you don't need so much effort to learn this language. Why are we not already learning this language? There again, some kind of colonial mindset has been injected into us. And the final thing which I would like to say is, we are talking about Hindu studies, right? There are Hindu studies departments, so many Hindu studies departments outside India. Why is it, Dr. Gupta, that we don't have even one Hindu study? I'm not just saying, I'm just asking you the question. So there is some, I have told you this sometimes earlier also, there is some problem with the government. And so the government structure itself does not allow many universities like the Ramakrishna Mission University or Chinmaya University. They have all approached the government to have a department on Hindu studies. I'm now also working in collaboration with I'm collaborating with a university called Adams University. So it's a private university. It's not a deemed university. It's a private university in West Bengal. They want to open a department of Hindu studies. So the government is not. There is some problem. So why, when Oxford has a center for Hindu studies, Cambridge, everywhere there is, University of Chicago is there, and that is one thing. And second, why don't we, in this age of open source, etc., why are we not making popular books? For example, Ramakrishna Mission. We have books on Hindu texts translated in so many, almost all Indian languages, and very cheap. But somehow it has gone into the mindset of the youth that if you buy a book which costs 50 rupees, that is no knowledge at all. You have to buy a book which is costing 500 rupees or $50, 5,000. So this is again a problem, the perception problem, a mindset problem. And also, why would we, whenever we conduct a conference, I'm not talking about you, Jeffrey, please don't make it otherwise. Why would we invite as experts on scriptural traditions people who are non-Indians to begin with? We do not have, that is what I was again reminded in that conference at Chinmaya Mission, that we have so many people who do tremendous work. See, work like that of Professor Kulkarni, why is that kind of work not talked of? So it's again a mindset problem. So this is a which again was a project which Swami Vivekananda took, popularizing Hinduism. See, today, if someone were to write a book, say in West Bengal, that Rasagollas are bitter, nobody will buy that book. That book will die its natural death. Because everybody knows that it's something you're telling. But Hinduism, people don't know how many of our young people have read Gita. So because they don't know, if Wendy Doniger comes up with some pure theory, they will go for it. They will say, हाँ, University of Chicago में पढ़ाती है तो जानती ही होगी. Because we don't know. So the problem of this, the solution of this problem lies at home again. We have to teach Hinduism. And as I told you earlier, it was traditionally built in the lifestyle, so we didn't need that because it was already being done. Now it is not so the case. So we need to teach. There should be something called Hindu catechism. I don't like to use the word. It has got obvious Judeo-Abrahamic overtones. But then we need to have that kind of a teaching. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Swamiji. I'm also a panelist, so I give myself 10 minutes. Thank you. It's an honor to be sitting next to Swami and an eminent professor. About sannyasis, Gita has a very interesting verse. Says, Geyase nitya sannyasi, dveshti me kamshati, nirdvando hi mahabahu sukham bandhat pranujyate. Chapter 5. Now, why are there so many distortions of Hinduism? If you look at the Indian history, the first distortion, and which is very deliberately done, is about the so-called theory of Aryan migration or Aryan invasion. The history tells us that certain invaders came on horseback. They came 2,000 kilometers without food and water, just to educate a population which was totally illiterate, having no background, no education. And we accepted it because it was repeated by certain, as you said, the colonial masters, and later on it was adopted by the certain intellectual in India. So I would not talk too much about the colonial bias, because I would stick to what Paramahansa Yogananda says. There are two kinds of human beings, those who know and those who are ignorant. So let's do it this way. Let us say that those who do not know about history. Now, one problem that happened is that itihas, now in Sanskrit, itihas means the way it was. So that is history. Now, in Latin languages, For example, I was in Italy. La storia, the history, is synonymous with story. In French, in histoire, history and story are the same. In fact, when I told one Italian lady, she said, "Oh, I didn't know that in my language, history and story, that is fiction and history, are the same."
Same roots.
Same root, same word also, same word. Now there is a famous saying by Adi Shankaracharya, where he says, "Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya." Now people, even Indians don't know how to translate it, so that God is true and the world is mithya. Now, while doing the English translation, mithya became myth, and from myth you have mythology, and which means false. So, itihas was categorized as mythology, that is Ramayana and Mahabharata, which means it is false. It's just a story, not history. While the original idea, when the itihas was written, the itihas meant was the way it was. So it is actually the historical account. Of course, when you talk about the king, there are a few embellishments, but the story exists. Now, when you go to England, for example, so you have these popular James Bond films. I don't think you have 1, 2, or 5 or 20 cities named after a James Bond city. But you say, no, Ram is a mythological figure, but Ayodhya exists. So we have created our geography based on myth only. So we like the novel, and we have named cities based on the characters of the novel. So you have Lucknow based on Lakshman, you have Sitamarhi, Sita, you have Ayodhya, Ram, but somebody comes and tells us this is myth, and I am told people have filed affidavits in the Supreme Court saying that this is all myth, and Ram Setu is also myth. So this was done, as Professor Arvind Sharma ji was saying, that to say that whatever good happens or exists in India has been imported. That is why sometimes for good things we are still re-importing. So that is in answer to your thing about why do we take Western scholars more seriously? Because we have to now re-import knowledge. But I must say that certain Indology departments are doing extraordinary. Now, as regards the point of, say, distortion, now for church the term is Girjaghar. Girja has come from igreja. In Portuguese, igreja means church. So the locals, they could not pronounce it, so igreja became Girja. And Ghar is Ghar. So one missionary who came, he said, no. In Ramayana there is a mention that Sita goes to Girija Greh. Before the Swayamvar, Sita ji goes to Parvati's temple to worship. So this Western scholar says, no, she went to a Girja Ghar. She went to a church. Even if we accept that Ramayana is true, here there is a proof that your own mother goddess is worshipping in a church. So this is how subtle mischaracterization has been done. Even Ajanta Ellora, the art, the paintings you have, they said, no, this has come from Greece. Although Alexander did not ever occupy it. All he did was some raids here and there. It's like a surgical strike. You go, you come back. So surgical strike does not mean that you go occupy a territory, change the culture of a country. But in India's case, Alexander's surgical strike became the change of culture. that we have learned the entire art and architecture and everything from Alexander. So, now this has been perpetuating. Once you say that Aryans came, the point was to divide India between Aryans and Dravidians. In Sanskrit, Dravidian only means somebody who's from the south. So north and south. But if you do the genetic mapping, genes of people in Kashmir and in Kerala are identical. But nobody talks about it. Even Indians don't talk about it. So why blame foreigners that they are trying to do neo-colonization? Because we ourselves are becoming ignorant. Now, about the funding part, you raised a very important issue. Funding cannot be done on a voluntary basis. The Italian model is a very good model. The government of Italy has an agreement with the Pope that 8 euros out of 1,000 euro tax, that is 0.8% tax collected by the Italian treasury, will go to finance the religion. Every year, billions of dollars goes to Vatican. Now, when I was ambassador, as luck would have it, Sanatan Dharma was also recognized as a state religion. Because we have 200,000 people of Indian origin, and the Hindu cultural, the Italian Hinduist Union, if you say my contribution will go to the Italian Hindu Union, they are getting the tax contribution. So making it voluntary will not happen. Now my last point is about the mandatory teaching of Bhagavad Gita. You see, I have attended some conferences where people put overemphasis on chapter 18, verse 63. When the entire teaching is completed by Shri Krishna, he says, Iti te jnanam akhyatam guyad guyataram maya vimarsheta yasheshe yatha ichchasi tata. Even at my home, whenever I talk about the Gita, they say, yatha ichchasi tata. Do as you wish, that we will do what we like. Anyways, but here we forget about the first part. Vimarsheta asheshe. Do profound contemplation on all the 18 chapters and then decide what you want to do, so that nobody is interested. Youth is only interested in yatha ichchasi tata karo, I'll do what I like. Now, and that is not the end of the story. Here Krishna is only, to my knowledge, only creating an illusion of giving options. I had argument with you mentioned about a professor in Oxford professor. I said there is no option given here because the answer of Arjun is important. If I am giving the option, Arjun should say, I'll do A, not B, not C, not D. Arjun says, Nashto mohana smriti labdha tat prasadan maya achyut sthito asmi gatsan deha karishyai vachanam. And Arjun says that my delusion has gone, my memory has come back, now I am sthit pragya and I will do as you command. So it is, the question is whether Gita is a command or optional. Gita is clearly a command. Krishna can say, in his greatness, Krishna says it is, I give you this option. But if you are a real Arjun, for a real Arjun it is a command. Now that is where our mistake is. I keep talking in conferences that Gita should be made mandatory, then some intellectual comes up, Indian intellectual, Westerners have no problems. Indian intellectual will come up and say, no sir, let it be optional. If it is optional, who is going to study Sanskrit? They are not interested because they simply say, can I get a job? People are concerned about jobs, about their future, about, you ask anybody. How many youth are interested in learning? So these have to go simultaneously. Ma manusmat vichya. Remember God and do the action. Now I only summarize what I had prepared a lot, but just the summary of the Hindu thought. Because today is the WhatsApp world or McDonald's world. How to summarize the Gita in 8 to 9 words. And Gita's sublime message is that you love all, serve all, remember God, and speak the truth. And that is how it was summarized by the great Baba Neem Karoli of Kanchi Ashram. Thank you.